What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college basketball. It is Wednesday, March the 12th. We have most conference tournaments underway. A few are beginning today. Big East, SEC, a few others, and some are ending. Last night we had champions crowned in the horizon and a few at the CAA. But we will move forward. There's a lot to talk about today as conference championship week continues. And before we get started, anyone who's subscribed, liked the videos, left a comment, thank you very much. It helps a ton. Can't tell you how much it actually impacts the channel. It's huge. And we've recently got up to 519 subscribers as we try to reach the goal of 1,000. So thank you if you've done that. It means a lot. It's not lost on me that you're choosing to spend a little bit of your time with me. So thank you. All right. SEC, Georgia and Oklahoma in the opening round. This game has a spread of 3 points in favor of Georgia. The total is 148.5. Only injury in the game is Sam Goodwin for Oklahoma. Not sure on his status. But unlike most conferences, these first round games in the SEC are about as high stakes as you could possibly get with the bubble situation in the SEC. Essentially every team live to make it except for LSU and South Carolina. And both of these teams are firmly on the bubble. I think both of them have done some good work of late, but a loss here is going to be challenging, especially if there's any bid stealers. This game, it's a rematch of January 11th. Georgia did win 72-62. They played at home. Both teams had a bad shooting game, under 26% from three, and Georgia was at 17.5%. With that said, Georgia did out-rebound Oklahoma 41-33. They generated 28 fouls. That led to 37 free throws. Oklahoma only shot 9. So, yeah, that's how you get the Georgia win in the first game by 10 points. You shoot 37 free throws. Doesn't really matter if you shoot 17% from three. You're going to have a good chance. And they did. Resume-wise, these teams are actually pretty comparable, which is, I guess, how you end up on the bubble from the SEC. Georgia's 3-7 against the top 25. They've beaten St. John's, Kentucky, and Florida. And despite having 10 losses, their worst loss is to Arkansas, who's power ranked 40th overall, and that occurred on the road. This is just the resume you're getting in the SEC. It's an insane body of work that these teams have put up. Oklahoma is pretty similar. They're 3-8 against the top 25. They've beaten Arizona, Louisville, and Missouri. They only have 2 losses outside the top 40 to Texas at 46 and LSU at 81. Not quite as forgivable as the Georgia resume, but still a very good body of work, especially with your 2 worst losses coming in this conference. But stylistically, it's a little bit challenging for Oklahoma in some of these SEC matchups. They don't have the same athletes as other programs. That can be said for this matchup against Georgia, who's 24th in effective height, 53rd in rebounding. Oklahoma's 145th in effective height, one of the smaller teams in this conference, and they're 242nd in rebounding. That advantage did play out in the first game, and Oklahoma really struggled with the size that Georgia puts on the floor. It kind of gets worse, too. Oklahoma is better offensively. They're better in most of the shooting metrics, just pure shooting. They're 41st in effective field goal, 49th from 3. But that doesn't really match up well against Georgia, who plays the better defensive game overall. They're elite at defending the 3, top 20 unit there. Oklahoma's not going to be able to score inside effectively with the size. So it's a pretty tough stylistic matchup for Oklahoma scoring points. Then on the other side, Georgia definitely has their issues scoring the ball. They're 103rd in effective field goal. Streaky as a 3-point team, I think you could put it. Maybe that's a little bit kind. But they do have just this massive mismatch inside with Ace and Newell. Oklahoma's 316th in interior defense. This should be a spot where Georgia gets to the rim repeatedly and hopefully shoots fewer threes in the first game where you don't have to rely on the free throws to get you there. But this is a major mismatch. It's one that Oklahoma often has to deal with, but it's pronounced in this game against Georgia. And then aside from, I guess, hitting threes, the fouls are still a problem in this game. Especially for Oklahoma. That foul margin played out in the first game, but that vastly favors Georgia here. As far as turnovers go, that does favor Oklahoma. They're 104th in turnovers forced. Georgia is 291st in turnovers committed. Some of that has changed a little bit since they've put Silas Demare at point guard, but Tyron Lawrence, he's been actually a little better since the injury. He missed a couple games with his hamstring. Their turnovers have dropped slightly, still a concern, but there's a lot of matchup advantages for Georgia. At the end of the day, though, the model still makes this inside the 3 points, which is why the lean on the screen suggests that. This is just a pure stay away for me. Mathematically, this comes in inside the 3. Stylistically, intuitively, I want to bet Georgia in this game. But anytime there's a disagreement like this, it's going to lead to me staying away for the most part. Awesome game. I'm going to watch it. I think it's the best game of the day as far as the stakes. And it actually should be a pretty good game overall. Total's decent at 148.5. You could talk me into an over, but we'll see. Might just be a game where we view it. Staying in the SEC, Texas takes on Vanderbilt. 2-point spread in favor of Vandy, a 148.5 total. No major injuries in this game. Vanderbilt's Grant Huffman and MJ Collins missed their last game. I think there's a decent chance both return. With the tournament insight, sometimes you just get teams holding players out. And this is not quite as bubbly as the first game. Texas is pretty far out. They're going to have to win multiple games if they're going to redeem themselves. And Vandy's pretty securely in. I don't think they're out with a loss here. But still a good game. Seeding implications for Vandy for sure. It's a rematch from February 8th. Vanderbilt won 86-78 at home. Texas did deal with some injuries. No Chendo Weaver, who returned last game, played a couple minutes. He's been out for most of the year. And then they also didn't have Tremont Mark in that game. The shooting metrics were relatively even. Vanderbilt won on the glass somehow. They had 17 offensive boards. But overall, it was a pretty close game. And that's the thing you see with Texas sometimes, is this team is poorly coached. Rodney Terry is going to get fired, if not this year, then certainly next. I highly doubt he can turn the program around. But Vanderbilt's the smallest team in this conference. When you have teams like Texas, who's not super tall, but definitely taller than Vanderbilt, giving up 17 offensive boards, 44 boards overall, like you have to ask yourself some questions about roster building, what this team is putting on the floor, effort-wise, stylistically. What is your rotation? I mean, there's so many questions with Texas, and it shows up in their body of work. They're 2-5 against the top 25. They've beaten Missouri and Texas A&M. They have 4 losses outside the top 40, Arkansas twice, Vandy, and South Carolina. So it's not, I mean, this body of work is still pretty decent overall, and that's what you get in the SEC. But, man, I don't know how you take a Texas team. They've lost 7 of their last 9 games. In this conference, you just need to do better. Vanderbilt is 4-6 against the top 25. They beat Tennessee at number 5. They've also beaten Kentucky and Texas A&M as well as Missouri. They have 2 losses outside the top 40, Drake and Arkansas. That Drake team is 57th overall, but it continues to age well. Drake has only a couple losses here. I believe they're 30-3 or 29-3. So that's a loss that has aged actually a little better than you might have thought earlier in the year. But they've now lost 2 straight as well. Both these teams have been struggling a little bit of late. Vanderbilt got crushed by Georgia and Arkansas. So their size is definitely becoming a problem in some of these games. And that's just it. They're 317th in effective height, 161st in rebounding. So they're doing a lot with not very much. Texas comes in 143rd in rebounding. They're 106 in effective height. They're over 200 spots ahead of Vanderbilt in terms of effective height in this game. Interestingly, and this surprised me because Vanderbilt's sort of reliant on their shooting at times, Texas actually has the better shooting numbers. 3-point percentage, they outrank Vandy 59-223. They're also superior on defense. Overall, that gap is 67-81. Inside, 41-195. And from 3, 176-341. I bet against Vandy a few times this year and gotten burned. And they've run hotter than the sun in a couple games. They've also lost, predictably, when teams can exploit their size. Texas has this advantage. We make the spread inside the 2, closer to a -1. I haven't played it yet. I have very little faith in Texas. In general rule of thumb, I'm trying to avoid these teams like Arkansas and Texas that just swing wildly with their volatility. But it's them or pass, and I am debating an over in this game. I know the narrative bros will say neutral court unders. We make this pretty far over. I think the under might take some money, so I'm hesitating right now. But Texas, I think, should score pretty well in this game. Vandy as long as they're hitting their shots. And I'm not super worried about Texas's defense. That could be an avenue to look to as well. I think Texas is going to score against this defense. It's really what it comes down to in that matchup is what does Vandy do offensively? And I guess just briefly on the Texas defense, if I were trying to exploit it, I think I'm probably just shooting threes. Vandy already does that. They're not great at it, but I don't want to go up against Caden Shedrick inside, who's a 0 on offense, but he's actually very, very good on defense, is Caden Shedrick. Before we move on, if you or somebody knows a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play. Big Ten clash. Iowa takes on Ohio State. This game has a 5-point spread in favor of the Buckeyes at 156 total. And right away, implications, Iowa's out. They would need to win the Big Ten tournament in order to get a berth. But they did knock off Nebraska in the regular season finale, who was on the bubble and now didn't even make the Big Ten tournament, funny enough. Ohio State has accrued too many losses. They would need to win probably 3 games or win it all to get in. I don't know. This team is on the bubble, but man, I don't know how you can accrue so many losses and get in the Big Ten. This is not the SEC. It's a good conference, but it's not quite the same. Injuries, Owen Freeman's been out for Iowa. Michi Johnson left Ohio State. It's a rematch from January 27th. Ohio State won 82-65 at home. Iowa shot 28% from 3. They got crushed by Ohio State in the glass. They were out-rebounded 43-31. Resume-wise, Ohio State 3-7 against the top 25, beat Kentucky, Purdue, and Maryland. But 14 losses? I don't know, man. This is a lot of losses. They lost to Pitt. They lost to Nebraska. Lost to Indiana twice. They lost to Northwestern. Some of these losses are pretty bad. 2 of them are outside the top 50. Just a really questionable body of work. Iowa's certainly worse, but that's why they're not being considered for the tournament. They have 2 top 50 wins all year, Northwestern and Indiana. Both of those are, they're in the low 40s. They have 3 losses outside the top 50 already. Utah State, Minnesota, USC. So you give me 2 low 40 wins on the high end and a couple losses outside the top 50. It's a pretty brutal body of work for Iowa. But I will say this game aesthetically is going to be fun to watch as long as you like offense. Don't worry about the defense. That might be embarrassing, but man, tempo is pretty good. Iowa plays fast, 51st overall. Ohio State is a neutral. They're 189th. That's remained constant in and out of conference play. But you have 2 good offenses. Both are in the top 33. Iowa a little bit on top. And both defenses outside the top 58. And that's really just Ohio State at 58 because Iowa's 176th overall. Just breaking that down, 342nd interior defense, 213th perimeter defense. This team is a walking shootout. They play fast, they play horrible defense, and they can actually score. This team is 18th in effective field goal percentage. They're good inside and out. They can score on you inside and they can shoot threes. It just so happens in the first game we had an outlier performance negatively for Iowa. But man, so first of all, they're doing their part running and scoring. And then they're also being so friendly to their opponents by being a complete sieve on defense. And this has been a staple of the McCaffrey era. They have not played defense in like the last 5 years, going back to like Luka Garza. But man, what does Ohio State have to really do on offense? I don't think they need to play much better above expectations. This offense is actually pretty good. They're 63rd in effective field goal. They shoot threes really well. 31st overall. It's mainly Bruce Thornton and Mobley. But inside, they should be able to score as well. Typically, they're seeding size, which I guess they are. Technically, they're 247th in effective height. Iowa's still 124th. But everyone's been able to score on Iowa, big and small. So I think Royal's going to be fine. Sean Stewart, Aaron Bradshaw, if he plays any significant amount of minutes in this game. The defense is just so bad. The matchup is so good. I don't know how you don't score inside against this team. We played an over at 155.5. We actually don't make it too far beyond that as far as the projected spread, but I still think this is worth playing, even if it's at a 156, which is the most available number right now. I think it might take some extra money over the top. If you force me to pick a side, it's Ohio State or pass, but one we did play and are pretty happy with is the over in this game. To the Big East, who tips off today, the Big East tournament. Butler plays Providence. They're a 1.5-point favorite. The total is 147. And this game has a few injuries, mainly on the Providence side. Butler's actually a lot healthier than they have been. But, of course, Bryce Hopkins, he's been out for most of the year. Jabri Abdur-Rahim's out for the year. Wesley Cardette missed the latest game again. He missed a series of games, returned for 2 of them, and then most recently was out again. I'm not sure on his status. But this is the bottom of the Big East. These teams split the regular season. The home team won both times. Providence, they beat up on Butler pretty bad in the first game, 84-65. Butler shot the ball so bad in that game. It was just a horrific performance. But the real concerning thing in that game was Providence out-rebounded Butler 43-26. That included 16 offensive boards. But Butler sort of got them back. I mean, the second game was 82-81, so they won by a point. And this was a game where Providence was less healthy. They didn't have Abdur-Rahim or Cardette. Both teams did shoot the ball well, and Butler got them back on the glass, which was my biggest concern. 34-24 was their advantage rebounding. And then from there, stylistics favor Butler a lot more than the resumes. I guess the resumes actually kind of favor Butler too, but it's just these two head-to-heads that are really concerning. Providence is 4-15 against the top 100. Their best win is against BYU, so good win. Next best win is against Nova at 55. So, yeah, you can tell this drops off quick. 3 losses outside the top 100. They dropped their worst game to Davidson at 144. Butler is 5-16 against the top 100. They do have more wins, but not quite as high quality as BYU. Mississippi State at 32 is not far behind. That's a great win. Also beat SMU and Northwestern. 2 losses outside the top 100. Somehow they lost a game to Austin Peay, who's 274. So they definitely have the worst loss, but I think they have the better body of work up top and the more consistent body of work, albeit very slightly. As far as some of the stylistics, Butler's much taller than Providence, 19th in effective height to 190th, but weirdly Providence is better in rebounding, 67th to 104. So that was a matchup I was looking at closely in the weeds from the head-to-heads. Each of these teams took a game on the glass, so I think it's a pretty neutral matchup overall, with outs to Butler being better because they're just so much bigger. And then on offense, Butler outranks Providence 77 to 102 in effective field goal percentage. All the shooting metrics coming in favor of Butler. Both teams love to shoot threes. Butler's actually very good at shooting threes. They're 34th in three-point percentage, and they have Providence beat, who's 61st. But then you look defensively, not a strength for either team, but Butler's actually 59th in three-point defense. Providence is 164th. So you have 2 teams trying to shoot threes. Butler's better at it, and they're in the easier matchup. Turnover and foul margin both significantly favor Butler. This is just probably not the roster Providence thought they'd be playing with at this time in the year. No Hopkins, of course. And then losing some other role players, contributors on the way is not great, but no real point guard. They're 296th in turnovers committed. Butler's 125th. Fouls, Butler doesn't commit any. Providence is 255th in fouls committed. Fouls generated, Butler's 44th overall. Providence is 306. So, there's so many peripheral micro advantages to Butler. Really, the one thing you have to get over in the game is just Butler did not look good in the 2 head-to-heads. But I think you can hang your hat on those were 2 of the better games Providence played all year. They've looked horrific in the Big East, losing games to teams like DePaul. 1.5 is pretty generous. We make this outside 2, not by much, but definitely outside 2. If you can get this at a 1, I think that's a great number. 1.5, I'm okay with. That's the number I played. It's basically just plugging your nose and hoping Providence doesn't show up like they've shown up in the 2 previous games. Let's get to some higher profile mid-majors, low majors, depending on how you want to classify it. Navy takes on American. This is the Patriot League Championship. An auto berth is on the line to the NCAA tournament. The spread is 3 points in favor of American. The total is 131. To get here, the 5th seed Navy beat Boston, and then they beat the number 1 seed Bucknell by 6 points to reach this point. American was the number 2 in the conference. They knocked off Lafayette and Colgate to get here. 2 pretty solid bodies of work for both teams. And this is a these teams played home and homes. A lot of these small conferences still do. Navy won both regular season matchups, shockingly. First game, they won 81-58. That was at home. And then they won 68-60 on the road, which is important because this conference still plays home games for their conference tournament. So American is technically a home team, but not technically. They are the home team. They're playing in their home court because that's what the Patriot League does. But it's weird that we already saw Navy come in and win a game there. As far as what happened in the contest, basically in both, it could be summed up simply. They outshot American, they out-rebounded American, and they generated more fouls. That happened in both games, home and away. Which is, I find it hard to reconcile because American has the better body of work. Navy's 8-12 against the top 100. Their best win is against Bucknell. Excuse me. Against Bucknell, but that was in their last game. So I guess peaking at the right time is important. But Navy has 6 losses outside the top 300. Their worst one came against Coppin State, who's the third worst team in the country. They are 362 in power rankings. American is 13-9 against the top 200. Their best win is against George Washington, who's at 107. That's actually a significant win for an American program. Easily the best win between either team. They also played a more difficult non-con. American played High Point. They only lost by 7 points. That's a tournament team. But they also have some low-end losses. Not as bad as Coppin State, but 2 losses outside the top 300 to Boston and Army. That's always a weird game with the rivalry. But as you can see, head-to-heads favor Navy. Overall body work favors American. Stylistically, Navy plays a tiny lineup. They're 359th in effective height, but their effort is unbelievable. 113th in rebounding still. And they have American beat here, weirdly. American's 239th in effective height, much taller. But American is nearly 300th in rebounding. They're 294th. Definitely not a strength for this team, and Navy hasn't beat on the glass. Navy beat them on the glass twice already, despite playing this mini lineup. So I'm not sure how to reconcile Americans' inability to use their size. And some of this, it's stylistic. Had some good comments yesterday, some really good comments about, first of all, teams that attack the glass offensively, they can get cooked in transition on defense. So sometimes teams will prefer getting back on defense so they don't leave themselves vulnerable to points in transition. There's a couple reasons why teams might do that. But I think that is something American does. They're awesome. Not awesome. They're pretty good defensive rebounding, 57th overall, and then offensive rebounding is 330th. Just total rebounding coming in at 294th is still concerning for this team. And the other thing, 3-point shots. We've talked about a few teams that take a lot of threes and don't shoot them well and question the stylistic choice. I have been defaulting to teams are bad at shooting threes. That might not be the case. They might be taking bad threes. I think either way, you end up with the same outcome. Whether you can't shoot threes or you take bad threes, you end up with low 3-point shooting percentages. So that's not as impactful as the offensive rebounding stuff. But either way, even if American is preferring to get back and not get cooked in transition, which appears to be the case, they're still ceding a lot of rebounding to Navy in this game, despite being much taller. Anyway, from there, American has a lot of advantages. They're the better shooting team by a pretty wide margin, 143 in effective field goal to 296. American is more defensive advantages. The only place the Navy actually outranks American is on the interior, and it's not by much. Both these teams are really bad in there. It's 244 to 275. And then Navy plays that tiny lineup anyway, so I'm not sure they're going to take advantage scoring-wise over what American puts on the interior for defense. Navy does generate more fouls, and that's been a huge problem for American. They get into foul trouble a lot. That also played out in the first 2 games. So it's sort of like, what do you make of these micro advantages for Navy? Do you think the rebounding is a drastic advantage? The foul margin is a drastic advantage? They used them both effectively in the first game. But if they don't, if American could stay out of foul trouble, if American cannot get cooked on the glass quite as bad, they have such drastic shooting advantages. They're better on defense in the half court overall. This is a very efficient game in this conference. We actually make it almost right on 3. We would make this American minus 3.2. The spread is minus 3. That has me leaning American slightly. They have the better body of work. They're a well-coached team. Love Matt Rogers, their best player. We'll see where this line goes throughout the day, but right now it's just going to remain a lean, and we'll see if we don't get some information or a line movement that leads to an actionable play. If we do, it will be in Discord. If you're interested in Discord, the link is below. We have games projected, sides, and totals for every contest, player props for not just the major games now, but we are doing all of the high majors. Recently, we've been getting some offerings for mid majors and low majors in their tournaments and championships, which has been a very nice boost to the bankroll. All that is available, projected every single day. There's no long-term commitment, so even if you just want to jump in for March, feel free. We'd be happy to have you. And the link is in the description if you were interested. Big Sky Conference Championship. It is Montana taking on Northern Colorado. No major injuries in this game. A 2.5-point spread in favor of Northern Colorado. 148.5 total. To get here, Northern Colorado, who is the 1 seed, beat Weber State, crushed them, and then they beat Montana State yesterday, also crushed them. Pretty egregious showing for Montana State, who put up 45 points. Unbelievable. The number 2 seed Montana, to get here, they beat Northern Arizona and Idaho. Both were pretty decent routings as well. And now you get the 1 and the 2 seed in the Big Sky, the rightful championship game. And whoever wins this contest will be a strong representative from this conference. In the big dance, these teams split the regular season, and the road team won both times. Northern Colorado won 81-57. Largely became because Montana shot 19% from 3 and got annihilated on the glass. 46-27. But in the second game, Montana got them back 86-78. This time, they went from 19% of their threes going in to 63%. And they righted the ship on the glass. They won the battle there, but it was only 30-26. So you have a pretty neutral body of work, at least head-to-head wise. Montana's 5-7 against the top 200. Best win came against Cal Northridge, who's a strong team. They're barely outside the top 100. 2 losses to sub-200 teams, Idaho State and Portland State. No real shame there. Both those teams are high 200s, 212 and 207. Northern Colorado is 6-6 against the top 200. Their best win came against South Dakota State at 135. It's another good win. They have 2 losses outside the top 200 as well. Portland State and Idaho. Idaho at 276, a little questionable. Stylistically, effective height favors Northern Colorado, 240-351. Rebounding also favors Northern Colorado, 99-297. So that's a pretty clean advantage on the glass. That played out in the first game, strongly in favor of Northern Colorado. It was pretty neutral in the second with a slight edge to Montana. Shooting-wise, both these teams are awesome on offense. This is an elite game if you like offense. Brutal defenses on both sides. 2 teams in the top 26 in effective shooting. Montana at 26, Northern Colorado at 7th. All of the defensive metrics for these teams are outside the top 200, except Montana's 190th ranked 3-point defense, if that's something that really is a difference maker for you. So this is all action, all offense, no defense for both of these teams. Pacing in the game is pretty decent. Northern Colorado's 80th, Montana's at 186. That's remained constant throughout conference play, non-con. So you have a matchup that is sort of up-tempo, because Montana's average and Northern Colorado's fast. 2 electric shooting teams, 2 awful defenses. The reason this total comes in lower at 148 is because of the back-to-back-to-back 3 games in a row for both teams. But man, I'm strongly leaning towards playing an over in this game. I have a hunch under money might come in, so we're going to wait and hesitate. I would play the 148.5 over if you force me right now. But I think you might get a 147.5 or 148. So we'll wait on that, see what we can grab. And if you force me to pick a side, it would be Northern Colorado minus the 2.5. They have more advantages, especially coming inside. Slightly better with the shooting. A couple of defensive advantages, if you want to call them that. It's a pretty greasy game defensively, but offensively it should be all fireworks. Southland Conference Championship. Lamar takes on McNeese State. 13-point spread in favor of McNeese. 131 total. No real surprise here. McNeese is far and away the best team in this conference with Will Wade. McNeese beat Northwestern State to get here. They had the double bye, so only had to play 1 game. They're the 1 seed. Lamar actually had the double bye too. They were the 2 seed. They beat Nichols yesterday. Close game, 58-55, but they get the win. So regular season, McNeese took both matchups. They won the first at home 75-65. Then they won on the road 68-66. Shooting was pretty even in both games, but the real difference came in the periphery. McNeese generated far more fouls. They won the turnover battle in both games. And that might be a factor in this game because Lamar is no slouch. Overall, they are 5-8 against the top 200. They beat Texas A&M Corpus Christi twice as their highest win. 4 losses outside the top 200, 1 outside the top 300 to New Orleans, who had some weird body work this year. A couple high-end wins and some really bad losses for New Orleans. McNeese is 9-6 against the top 200. Their best win, they beat North Texas, who's 68th overall, but that's their only win in the top 100. And overall, some people might poke a hole in that. They don't have a lot of the high-end wins, as like a lot of March Madness sleepers do. For reference, like Drake has 2 top 100 wins. McNeese only has 1. But they played really close games against high-level competition. Single-digit losses to South Dakota State, Alabama, Liberty, Santa Clara, and Mississippi State. They have 1 bad loss on the resume. It's to Nichols. But man, this is a pretty good body of work for McNeese, and not just in the victories. Their losses, they've been impressive as well. The one area where they're probably going to get dinged, and if they run into the wrong matchup in the tournament, they could be a one and done, just bounce immediately. I mean, they're going to be an underdog in the tournament. They're probably going to be like a 13 seed, but they are matchup dependent if you're looking for Cinderellas because they're so small. They're tiny. They're 248th in effective height. They do rebound well despite this, 61st overall. That's generated by a Southland schedule. I'd be interested to see if they played in a better conference, what that would look like. But Lamar certainly has advantages if they can effectively use their height. That's easier said than done. They're 71st overall. Again, McNeese is 284th. But McNeese has the rebounding advantage, 61-129. So I don't really have faith in this. And then everywhere else, McNeese is basically top 100 in most major scoring metrics, most major defensive metrics. They're 84th in effective field goal percentage. Lamar's strength is their 114th defense, but McNeese is still ahead of them there, 73-114. Lamar can't shoot whatsoever. They're 303 in effective field goal. They're also 291 on turnovers committed. That is a huge strength for McNeese, who's 17th overall in turnovers forced. That was on the court in the first game. Oh, last thing. This conference also plays at home. So McNeese is playing a home game tonight. It's going to should be a crazy environment, tough spot for Lamar to play. We make this basically right on the spread. If you made me pick someone in the game, it would be McNeese minus the 13 at full health. This is a high major roster, basically transfers across the board, and playing at home in the conference championship with a berth to March Madness on the line with every single advantage. Lean McNeese, good chance I play this. We'll see if it doesn't move in one direction or another. I certainly wouldn't play anything beyond the 13, but that's at least playable. Big 12 continues today. Cincinnati takes on Iowa State, 9-point spread in favor of the Cyclones, 136 total. Injuries. Cincinnati, I'm not sure. No one listed, but they don't have an injury report. And Day Thomas and Jizzle James both got hurt yesterday for portions of the game. They had medical attention. Both of them were pretty late in the game, so I don't know what would have happened had the game continued. They're worth monitoring. At the very least, they probably are not 100%. Iowa State's Keyshawn Gilbert got the day off in their finale. I think he plays here. He had previously returned from an injury. It just seems like this team is gearing up to get players at full strength at the right time. That's at least my take on it. Cincinnati, it was a costly win if Jizzle James and Day are hurt or even banged up. But they did throttle Oklahoma State, who had an egregious amount of turnovers. What a bad game. But the first time these teams played on February 15th, Iowa State won 81-70. That was actually a rare full-strength game for Iowa State. We'll talk about that in a second. Both teams shot the ball well. Iowa State out-rebounded Cincinnati 40-19. They also forced 23 free throws. They forced 23 fouls. They shot 30 free throws. Insane. Cincinnati is one of the biggest disappointments this year. They have 1 win in the top 25. It came over BYU. 7 losses outside the top 50, the worst of which came to Oklahoma State in their season finale. Then they got revenge. Who cares? Cincinnati, pretty rough body of work. Iowa State is 3-5 against the top 25. Probably should be 4-4, but they end up losing a game to Arizona on like a half-court shot from Caleb Love that forced overtime, and then Arizona got him in the OT. But anyway, They beat Arizona in the rematch. Then they beat Texas Tech and Kansas. They have 3 losses outside the top 50, the worst of which also to Oklahoma State. But they've been one of the most injured teams in the country this year, at least with this level of talent. They're finally all back, assuming Keyshawn Gilbert plays. He's missed time with injury. Taman Lipsey's playing through an injury. Momcilovic missed a month of the season. It's been a brutal run out for this team, and somehow they've still been able to overcome it. Cincinnati is one of the worst offenses in the country, but they actually play decent defense. 161st in effective field goal percentage, horrible from 3. But man, I think even their defensive numbers aren't great. They're kind of bolstered by forcing turnovers. That's not an issue for Iowa State. They never turn the ball over. And then basically from there, Iowa State has superior metrics almost across the board. The only place that I guess you could see an advantage for Cincinnati's 3-point defense, and that's like a razor-thin margin. Rebounding, Iowa State is nearly 100 spots ahead of Cincinnati, and I don't think Cincinnati's going to play at full strength today. Coming off a back-to-back where you had multiple players get banged up, Iowa State at the extra rest. Give me the Cyclones, play the 8, make it pretty efficient at that number. So a little less interested in 9, but if you give the extra bump to Iowa State from having the extra rest, that's one I think you could play with some decent confidence. Conference USA, UTEP takes on Liberty, 7-point spread in favor of Liberty, 138 total. Ahmad Bynum has been injured for UTEP. That's important. More on that later. But hoping to redeem myself with Conference USA after the Western Kentucky. I don't even know what they shot. That was horrifying. They let FIU win a game. FIU beat them twice this year anyway. This is the quarterfinals of Conference USA. UTEP's the 8 seed. They did play yesterday, beat Sam Houston pretty convincingly. But that was for the privilege to face off against the 1 seed, who is Liberty. They had a bye, of course. These teams actually split the regular season. UTEP beat Liberty in the first game without Kevin Kalu, too, by 2 points. It was basically really even across the board. UTEP had like the ever slightest of advantages on the offensive glass and turnover-wise. Liberty took the second game, 76-69. They outshot UTEP from 3, did a much better job on the glass. UTEP still forced 5 more turnovers, but it wasn't enough for them to get the win. UTEP, interestingly, 2-2 against the top 100. This team beat Yale, and they beat Liberty once. However, once you extend the resume to top 200 teams, it gets a little greasier. They're 10-14 against that competition. Worst loss to Sam Houston State, who they avenged yesterday. Liberty's 2-0 against the top 100. They beat McNeese State and Kansas State. And then when you extend it to top 200 teams, they're 15-6. Their worst loss came to Western Kentucky. That embarrassment of a Hilltoppers team. Somehow Liberty lost to them. Both these teams are short and they're horrible on the glass. Anytime Liberty takes on a decent team, that's going to be your biggest concern. They are a diminutive team. However, this is like a uniquely good matchup for them because UTEP is even smaller and they cannot exploit this on the glass. So this is a pretty decent matchup for Liberty stylistically. You're not going to run into a team that boards well or can overpower you with size. UTEP is not that team. And UTEP can't shoot either. They're 257th in effective field goal. The biggest concern is their best shooter didn't play in their last game. Ahmad Bynum, 43% three-point shooter. If he's out, this team is like 300th in effective field goal percentage. They're horrible. Liberty is 6th in effective field goal. They are hyper efficient shooting the ball all over the floor. And they also are much better on defense. They outrank UTEP 30-116 total defense, 67-275 inside. Liberty's the number 1 perimeter defense in the country. UTEP is 154. We played a 6.5 in this game. I think anything like around 8 is fine. We make it closer to a -8 to begin with, and that's not even giving Liberty the boost of having the extra rest and UTEP playing yesterday. But that'll do it for us. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the video, if there's anything I can improve. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we will see you again tomorrow. Good luck.